I'm Sera Donnelly, 25 years old. Until 3 months ago, I believed that healing meant leaving the past behind completely. Then my mother's phone call changed everything. Victor is coming home, she said, as if 6 years of his absence meant nothing. As if the bruises on my arms and the nights I spent hiding in my closet were just bad dreams we could all forget. My mother's words still echo in my mind. He's changed. Sera, people deserve second chances. What she didn't know was that I had been paying for her therapy sessions for 2 years, sending money I earned from selling my art just so she could process what he did to us both. But here's what makes this story even more unbelievable. The day I found out he was coming back was the same day I got accepted into the most prestigious art program in the country. How was I supposed to choose between my future and protecting the people I love? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra. Special for you. The rain in Portland had become my friend. It matched my mood most days and gave me an excuse to stay inside my tiny studio apartment, sketching by the window while nursing my third cup of coffee. 6 years had passed since I'd stepped off that Greyhound bus with nothing but a water-damaged sketchbook and $43 to my name. 6 years of building a life that felt like mine. My apartment wasn't much, a converted warehouse space in the Alberta Arts District that I shared with mice and the occasional leak. But it was sanctuary. The walls were covered with my artwork. Charcoal portraits of strangers I'd met at coffee shops, watercolor landscapes of places I'd never been but dreamed of visiting, and abstract pieces that captured emotions I couldn't name. My easel sat in the corner like a loyal friend, always ready to catch whatever pain or joy I needed to pour out. Cleo, my roommate and best friend, burst through the door that Tuesday morning like she always did, without knocking and carrying enough energy to power the whole building. Her curly black hair was escaping from a messy bun, and she had paint under her fingernails from her job at the Community Arts Center. Sera, you're never going to believe what happened at work today, she announced, dropping her bag on our second-hand couch. Mrs. Chun brought in her grandson's portfolio, and I swear this kid is like 8 years old and already better at perspective than half the adults in my class. I looked up from my sketchbook, where I'd been working on a series of hands. Something about the way fingers could express what words couldn't have been occupying my mind lately. That's either really inspiring or completely devastating for your. I go, both, Cleo laughed, settling beside me and peering at my work. These are beautiful, Sera. There's something different about them today. More ... I don't know, alive? She was right. The hands I'd been drawing were just anatomical studies. Anymore. They were reaching, grasping, letting go, protecting. They told stories I wasn't even conscious of creating. Art had always been my language, the way I made sense of a world that often felt senseless. Dr. Stern thinks I'm making progress. I sighed, not looking up from my sketch. I've been seeing Dr. Naomi Stern for 3 years now, ever since I'd finally admitted that sleeping 4 hours a night and jumping every time someone raised their voice wasn't exactly healthy. That's good, Cleo said softly. She knew not to push when I brought up therapy. She'd been there for enough of my bad days to understand that healing wasn't linear, that some mornings I woke up feeling strong and others I could barely get out. Of bed, my phone buzzed on the coffee table and we both looked at it. The screen showed Mom with a picture I'd taken of her 5 years ago during one of our awkward coffee meetings. Her smile looked forced even then, like she was performing happiness for an audience that didn't believe her. I'd learned to screen her calls. Our relationship had been complicated since I left home at 19, a careful dance of monthly check-ins and surface-level conversations. We talked about my art, her job at the local library, the weather. We never talked about Victor, never. Talked about why I'd left, never talked about the elephant that had been sitting in our family room for over a decade. You don't have to answer it, Cleo said gently, but something in my gut told me this call was different. Maybe it was the way the phone seemed to buzz more insistently, Or maybe it was the fact that she was calling at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday when she should have been at work. I picked up. "Hi, Mom." "Sera, honey." Her voice sounded strained, like she'd been crying. "I need to talk to you about something important." My hand tightened around the phone. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetie. It's just ... Well, there's been a development with Victor." The name hit me like a physical blow. I hadn't heard her say it out loud in years. Victor Kane, the man who'd entered our lives when I was 10 years old like a storm. Sister moving in from the coast. At first, he'd seemed like salvation, a steady job, a man who paid attention to my mother, someone who fixed the leaky faucet and mowed the lawn. But storms have a way of revealing their true nature once they settle in. "What about him?" I managed to ask. "He's been in therapy, Sera, real therapy, with a professional, for 2 years now. And he's different. He's done the work to understand what he did wrong, and he wants to make amends." I could feel Cleo watching me, her artist's intuition picking up on the shift in my energy. My free hand had started sketching unconsciously, jagged lines, dark scribbles, the kind of marks that came from somewhere deeper than conscious thought. "Mom, what are you trying to tell me?" He asked if he could come home, and I said yes. The world tilted. 6 years of careful distance, of therapy sessions and art projects, and slowly learning to trust my own instincts. And she was inviting him back like he was a family friend who'd been away on vacation. "Sera, are you there?" "I'm here." My voice sounded far away, even to myself. I know this is a lot to process, but I really think people can change. He's been living in Eugene, working construction, staying sober. He sent me letters, beautiful letters about how sorry he is and how he wants to be better. I think we deserve a chance to be a family again. A family, as if the three of us had ever been that. As if family meant anything other than walking on eggshells and measuring your words and learning to make yourself small enough that you wouldn't accidentally trigger an explosion. "When?" I asked. "This weekend." He's driving up Saturday morning. 3 days. In 3 days, the man who'd spent 9 years systematically breaking down everything that made me feel safe in the world would be back in the house where I'd learned what fear tasted like. "I have to go, Mom." Sera, wait, I hung up. Cleo was beside me immediately, her warm hand on my shoulder. "What happened?" I told her everything, the words tumbling out in fragments. Victor's return, my mother's naive belief in redemption, the way my chest felt like it was caving in. Cleo listened, without judgment, the way she always did, occasionally squeezing my hand when my voice broke. "What are you going to do?" she asked when I finished. I looked down at my sketchbook. Without realizing it, I'd drawn a door, but I couldn't tell if it was opening or closing. "I don't know," I whispered. For the first time in 6 years, I really don't know. The next morning, I couldn't draw. For someone who'd been sketching compulsively since she was 7 years old, artistic block felt like losing a limb. I sat at my easel, charcoal in hand, staring at blank paper while my mind raced through every possible scenario of Victor's return. Cleo had left early for work after making me promise to call her if I needed anything. The apartment felt too quiet. Too empty, like the calm before a storm that everyone could sense coming except the people choosing to ignore the weather reports. My laptop sat open on the kitchen counter, showing the email I'd been staring at for the past hour. It was from Theo Tran, my professor and mentor at the Pacific Northwest College of Art. 3 months ago, I'd submitted a portfolio to the MFA program at Yale, a long shot that I'd applied for mostly to prove to myself that I was taking my art seriously. Yesterday, the same day my mother called about Victor, I'd received an acceptance letter that still felt like someone else's dream. Theo's email was characteristically brief. "Sera, heard the news about Yale. We need to talk about next steps. Are you free for coffee this afternoon?" I'd been putting off responding because I didn't know how to explain that getting into my dream program felt impossible when my nightmare was moving back home. How do you tell your mentor that you might have to choose between your future and protecting people who might not even want your protection. My phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Hi, Sera, it's Maya. Mom gave me your number." "I hope that's okay?" Maya, my 13-year-old half-sister, born when I was 12, and Victor had been part of our family for 2 years. She'd been a toddler when I left, barely old enough to understand why her big sister suddenly wasn't coming home anymore. Our relationship existed mainly through birthday cards and awkward video. Calls orchestrated by our mother. Another text came through. "I made you something. Can I send a picture?" Before I could respond, my phone lit up with an image that made my breath catch. It was a drawing, clearly Maya's work, done in colored pencils on lined notebook paper. The style was young but confident, showing a woman with long dark hair, clearly meant to be me, standing in front of an easel. The woman in the drawing was smiling, and there were little hearts floating around her head. At the bottom, in Maya's careful handwriting, "I want to be an artist like my big sister." My hands were shaking as I typed back, "It's beautiful, Maya. You're really talented. Thanks. I've been practicing. Mom told me about your college thing. That's so cool." College thing? Yale had been reduced to a college thing, probably because my mother didn't want to emphasize how far away I'd be going, how permanently I'd be leaving if I took the opportunity. "Maya?" I typed carefully. "How do you feel about Victor coming back?" The typing indicator appeared and disappeared several times. Before her response came through, "I don't really remember him that well. Mom says he's different now. She seems happy about it, so I guess it's good." That casual uncertainty broke my heart. Maya didn't remember the late-night arguments, the way Victor's mood could shift like weather patterns, the feeling of walking through your own house like you were navigating a minefield. She'd been protected by her age when I hadn't been protected at all. "Are you excited?" she asked. I stared at the question for a long time. How do you explain to a 13-year-old that the man your mother is welcoming home made you understand why some people never feel safe anywhere? How do you tell her that you left home not just to escape him, but to escape the person you were becoming under his roof? Small, silent, constantly anticipating the next emotional earthquake. "It's complicated," I finally wrote back. "Everything with grown-ups is complicated," came her immediate response, followed by a laughing emoji. I found myself smiling despite everything. Maya had inherited the family talent for finding light in dark situations. Though I wondered how long that would last with Victor back in the picture. My laptop chimed with a video call notification. Dr. Stern's face appeared on the screen, her expression warm but concerned. We'd scheduled this emergency session after I'd called her office in a panic the night before. "How are you feeling today, Sera?" she asked without preamble. Dr. Stern had learned over our 3 years together that I prefer directness to small talk, like I'm being asked to choose between saving myself and saving my family. I said, "And I'm not even sure my family wants to be saved." "Tell me about that feeling of having to choose." I explained about Yale, about Maya's innocent text messages, about my mother's phone call and the way she'd sounded almost giddy talking about Victor's transformation. Dr. Stern listened with the kind of attention that made you feel heard, occasionally nodding or asking clarifying questions. "What does your body tell you about Victor's return?" she asked. It was a question she taught me to ask myself, to pay attention to physical responses, to trust the wisdom of trauma stored in muscle memory. I closed my eyes and tuned in too. The sensations I'd been trying to ignore. "My shoulders are up around my ears," I said. "My stomach feels like I swallowed glass. My hands won't stop shaking, and I keep looking over my shoulder even though I'm alone in my apartment." "Your body remembers," Dr. Stern said gently. "It's trying to protect you. But what if he really has changed? What if I'm letting old fear keep me from giving someone a second chance?" "Sera, what would you tell a friend who is in your situation?" It was another technique she taught me, to extend to myself the same compassion I'd offer others. I'd tell them that their safety matters more than someone else's redemption story. I'd tell them that they don't owe anyone forgiveness, especially not someone who hurt them when they were vulnerable. And why is it harder to apply that wisdom to your own situation? Because she's my mother, I whispered. Because Maya is there. Because what if I'm wrong and I miss the chance to have a real family? What if you're right and you sacrifice your well-being for people who've already shown they're willing to sacrifice yours? The question hung in the air like smoke. After we ended the call, I sat in my kitchen trying to imagine what it would feel like to accept Yale's offer, to pack up my life again and move across the country. The thought felt both terrifying and exhilarating. A chance to disappear into anonymity, to become someone whose past existed only in whatever stories I chose to tell. But then I thought about Maya's drawing, about her excited messages, about the fact that she didn't remember Victor clearly enough to be afraid. Who would protect her if I left? Who would notice if his transformation was just another performance designed to get him back into a position of power over vulnerable people? My phone buzzed again. Maya had sent another message. Do you think you'll visit more now that Victor's back? It would be fun to have the whole family together. I stared at those words, the whole family together, and felt something crack open in my chest. She had no idea what she was asking for. No idea that the last time our whole family had been together, I'd ended up curled in my closet at 2 a.m., listening to my mother cry through the walls while Victor shouted about disrespect and ingratitude. But Maya didn't know that story. In her mind, I was just the distant big sister who'd chosen college over family, who sent birthday money but never came home for holidays. She didn't know that I'd chosen survival over family, or that those two things had been mutually exclusive for longer than she'd been old enough to understand. I picked up my charcoal and started drawing. This time the lines came easily. I drew hands again, but not the graceful, reaching hands from yesterday. These were hands clenched into fists, hands covering faces, hands pressed against doors that might or might not be locked out. As I drew, I realized something that made my stomach drop. I wasn't going to be able to run this time. Whether Victor had changed or not, whether my mother's faith in his redemption was wisdom or wishful thinking, I couldn't abandon Maya to find out. I couldn't live with myself if something happened to her that I could have prevented, but I also couldn't sacrifice my chance at Yale, couldn't give up the future I'd worked so hard to build. There had to be another way, some path that didn't require me to choose between protecting my sister and protecting myself. Just had to figure out what that path looked like before Saturday morning arrived, and Victor Kane walked back into our lives like he'd never left. Thursday brought the kind of gray Portland morning that made you want to stay in bed forever, but I forced myself to get dressed and meet Theo at our usual coffee shop in the Pearl District. Courier Coffee was one of those places that attracted artists and writers, with exposed brick walls covered in local artwork, and the kind of ambient noise that somehow made thinking easier. Theo was already there when I arrived, sitting at our regular table by the window with 2 cups of coffee and that patient expression he wore when he knew a student was struggling with something bigger than just their artwork. At 39, he had the kind of calm confidence that came from someone who'd found his purpose early and never wavered from it. His own journey from Vietnam to the U.S. as a child had given him a particular sensitivity to stories of survival and reinvention. Congratulations, he said simply as I sat down. Yale is lucky to have you. Thank you. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, using the heat to steady my shaking fingers, though I'm not sure I'm going to be able to accept. Theo raised an eyebrow but didn't immediately respond. This was his way, letting silence create space for truth to emerge. I'd learned over the past 2 years that he could outweigh anyone when it came to getting to the heart of what was really happening. Family situation, I said finally. Want to talk about it? I found myself telling him everything. About Victor, about my mother's phone call, about Maya's innocent drawings, and the impossible choice I felt like I was being forced to make. Theo listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions that helped me understand my own feelings better. Show me your hands, he said when I finished. It was an odd request, but I'd learned to trust Theo's unconventional methods. I placed my hands flat on the table between us. He studied them for a moment, then nodded. These are the hands of someone who's been carrying heavy things for a long time, he said. But they're also the hands of an artist. They know how to create beauty from pain, how to transform raw material into something meaningful. I don't understand. You're thinking about this situation like you have only two choices: go to Yale or stay to protect your sister. But artists don't think in binaries. We think in possibilities and what-ifs and new ways of seeing old problems. He pulled out his phone and showed me an image I recognized, one of my pieces from last semester's final exhibition. It was a mixed media work I'd called Reconstruction, showing a house being built and demolished simultaneously, representing the way trauma could destroy and heal at the same time. What story does this piece tell? He asked. That healing isn't linear. That sometimes you have to tear down what's broken before you can build something new. And who gets to decide what needs to be torn down? I stared at the image, understanding starting to dawn. The person doing the rebuilding? Exactly. Sera, you've been thinking about your family situation like something that's happening to you. But what if it's happening for you? What if this is the universe giving you a chance to rewrite the story? I don't know what you mean. Theo leaned forward slightly. You've spent 6 years healing from what that man did to you. You've built a new life, found your voice as an artist, learned to trust your own instincts. What if going back isn't about returning to the past, but about bringing your present strength to bear on an old situation? You think I should go home? I think you should consider all your options. Yale will always be there. Maybe not this exact program at this exact time, but opportunities for artists who are as talented as you are don't just disappear. But your sister is 13 now. This is a formative time for her, and if this man is truly dangerous, she needs an advocate who understands what that danger looks like. The idea was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. For 6 years, I'd thought of home as the place I'd escaped from. But what if I could go back as someone different, not the frightened teenager who'd left, but the woman I'd become? What if I could be for Maya what no one had been for me? There's something else, Thea said. I've been meaning to talk to you about the Regional Arts Council grant. They're looking for emerging artists to document stories of social justice and community healing. The timeline would be perfect. 6 months of funding to work on a major project that addresses trauma, family dynamics, power structures. Something tells me you might have a story worth documenting. My mind started racing. A grant that would fund my art while I figured out the family situation. A way to turn my personal pain into something that might help other people in similar situations. A chance to use my art not just as healing for myself, but as advocacy for others. The application deadline is next Friday, Theo continued. And knowing you, you've probably already got half the work done in the sketches you've been making this week. He was right. I've filled 3 sketchbooks in the past 2 days with frantic, urgent drawings, images of families fracturing and reforming, of doors opening and closing, of hands reaching across impossible distances. Without realizing it, I'd been documenting my own process of grappling with this impossible situation. Think about it, Thea said as we gathered our things to leave. And remember, sometimes the most important art comes from walking directly into the thing that scares us most. I spent the rest of the day walking through Portland's neighborhoods, trying to imagine what it would look like to go home. Not to stay permanently, not to give up on my dreams, but to go back as someone who could finally tell the truth about what had happened in that house. Someone who could protect Maya while documenting the complexity of family trauma and recovery. My phone rang as I was crossing the Burnside Bridge. Dr. Stern's number appeared on the screen. I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, she said without preamble, and I want to ask you something. What would it feel like to face Victor from a position of strength instead of fear? I don't know if that's possible. You've done 3 years of trauma work, Sera. You've learned to recognize manipulation, to trust your instincts, to set boundaries. You're not the same person who left that house 6 years ago. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But what if I go back and fall into old patterns? What if being in that environment makes me small again? That's a valid concern. But what if it doesn't? What if going back allows you to see how much you've grown? Sometimes we need to return to old places with new eyes to fully understand how far we've traveled. After we hung up, I found myself thinking about Maya's drawing again. The image of me standing in front of an easel, smiling, surrounded by little hearts. In her mind, I was someone to aspire to, someone who'd made it out and built a life doing what she loved. But she didn't know the cost of that escape, didn't understand that sometimes survival requires you to leave people behind. What if I could show her a different way? What if I could demonstrate that you don't have to choose between protecting yourself and protecting the people you love? What if I could model the kind of boundaries and self-advocacy that no one had taught me when I was her age? I called Cleo on my way home. I think I'm going to apply for the Arts Council grant, I told her. That's amazing. What changed your mind? I'm thinking about going home for a while. Not forever, not to run away from my dreams, but to finish some unfinished business. And maybe to make sure Maya has someone in her corner who understands what she might be up against. That's either really brave or really crazy, Cleo said. Possibly both. Probably both, I agreed. But I keep thinking about what would have happened if someone had been there to advocate for me when I was her age. Someone who understood the situation, who could call it what it was, instead of pretending everything was fine. I'll support whatever you decide, Cleo said. But promise me you won't sacrifice your future for people who might not appreciate the sacrifice. I promise this isn't about sacrifice. It's about ... completion, I guess. Finishing a story that I left half written. That night, I started working on the grant application. I wrote about the intersection of art and advocacy, about using creative practice to document and heal family trauma, about the way personal stories could illuminate larger social issues. I wrote about the responsibility artists have to bear. Witness, to tell the stories that are uncomfortable but necessary. As I wrote, I realized that going home wouldn't be a step backward. It would be the most courageous artistic project I'd ever undertaken, using my life as the canvas, my healing as the medium, and my voice as the tool for transformation. Victor might be coming back, but this time I would be ready for him. Friday evening found me hunched over my laptop at the kitchen table, surrounded by coffee cups, crumpled papers, and the scattered contents of 3 sketchbooks. The grant application was due by midnight, and I'd been wrestling with the personal statement for hours. How do you explain to a review committee that you want to document your own family's dysfunction in the name of art and social justice? Cleo had gone out with friends, giving me space to work, but the apartment felt too quiet. Every few minutes, I found myself checking my phone for messages from Maya or my mother, though neither had contacted me since Tuesday's bombshell announcement. The essay cursor blinked at me mockingly. I tried to find words for the project I was proposing. Reconstruction. A multimedia documentation of family trauma and recovery. It sounded so clinical when written that way, like I was studying someone else's life instead of preparing to dissect my own. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, but when I opened it, I recognized Maya's writing style immediately. Can I call you? Mom's at book club and I have questions. Before I could respond, my phone was ringing. Hey, Maya's voice was quieter than usual, more uncertain. What's up, kiddo? I was thinking about what you said about Victor coming back, being complicated, and I was wondering, why did you really leave home? The question hit me like a physical blow. In all our careful conversations over the years, we'd never addressed the elephant in the room directly. My mother had crafted a story about college and independence, about me being ambitious and wanting to explore the world. Maya had never questioned it before. What brought this up? I asked carefully. I found some old photos in Mom's closet. From when I was little, before you left, you looked ... different. Sad, I guess. And there weren't very many pictures of Victor in them, which seemed weird since he lived here. I closed my laptop and moved to the couch, settling in for what felt like an important conversation. Maya, how much do you remember about those years? Not much. I remember Victor being around, and I remember you babysitting me a lot. I remember you reading to me and helping me with my coloring, but I don't really remember you and Victor interacting. Much. That was intentional, I said softly. What do you mean? I took a deep breath, trying to figure out how to explain emotional abuse to a 13-year-old without traumatizing her or influencing her relationship with our mother. Victor and I didn't get along very well. He had very specific ideas about how people in the house should behave, and I was a teenager with opinions and dreams that didn't always match his vision. Did he hurt you? The question was direct, innocent, and devastating. Maya was old enough to sense that something wasn't right, but young enough to still believe that adults generally had good intentions. Not in the way you might think, I said carefully. But there are lots of ways to hurt someone without leaving marks. Sometimes people can make you feel small or wrong, or like you don't deserve to take up space in your own home. Maya was quiet for a long moment. Is that why you don't visit? Part of it, yeah. But also because I was building a new life, and sometimes when you're healing from difficult experiences, you need distance to figure out who you are outside of those experiences. Are you scared of him? The question hit the core of everything I've been trying to figure out. Was I scared? Or was I something more complex, vigilant, protective, unwilling to be vulnerable to someone who'd already proven he could hurt me? I'm cautious, I said finally. I've learned to trust my instincts about people and situations. And my instincts tell me to be very careful around Victor. But Mom thinks he's changed. Mom wants to believe he's changed. Sometimes when we love someone, we want so badly for them to be better that we convince ourselves they are, even when the evidence isn't clear. What kind of evidence? I found myself smiling despite the heavy conversation. Maya was going to be an excellent journalist or lawyer someday. Her instinct for asking the right questions was remarkable. Well, real change usually involves accountability. It means admitting specifically what you did wrong, making amends to the people you hurt, and demonstrating through actions over time that you've learned different ways of behaving. It's not just saying I'm sorry or I'm different now. Has Victor done those things? I don't know. I haven't talked to him, and I don't know what his therapy has involved or what kind of amends he's tried to make. That's part of why this situation is so complicated. Maya was quiet again, and I could hear her thinking. Sera, would you consider coming home? Not forever, but maybe for a while. I know you have your life in Portland, but I think I'd feel better if you were here when Victor comes back. The vulnerability in her voice broke my heart. Maya might not remember the specifics of what life had been like with Victor, but some part of her understood that his return represented uncertainty, potential danger. Her instincts were asking for protection, even if she couldn't articulate. Why? I've actually been thinking about that, I said. There might be a way for me to come home for a few months to work on an art project about family and healing. It's not definite yet, but it's a possibility. Really? The hope in her voice was unmistakable, really. But Maya, I need you to promise me something. If Victor comes back and anything feels wrong, if he makes you uncomfortable, if he says things that hurt your feelings, if you feel scared or confused, I need you to tell me right away. Can you do that? Yes. And I need you to know that none of this is your fault. Sometimes adults make decisions that affect kids, and it's not the kid's responsibility to fix those decisions or make the adults feel better about them. Okay. After we hung up, I sat in my living room staring at the grant application on my laptop screen. Mia's questions had crystallized something for me. This wasn't just about my own healing or artistic ambitions. It was about breaking cycles. About being the adult advocate I'd wished for when I was her age. I started typing, and this time the words flowed easily. Art has the power to bear witness to experiences that are often kept secret, to give voice to stories that society would prefer to ignore. Family trauma, particularly emotional and psychological abuse, thrives in silence and isolation. Victims are often told their experiences weren't that bad, that they should forgive and forget, that family loyalty requires accepting unacceptable. Behavior. This project proposes to document, through mixed media art, photography, and written narrative, the complex process of a survivor returning to confront family trauma from a position of healing and strength. Rather than a simple victim narrative, this work will explore themes of agency, boundaries, protection of vulnerable family members, and the possibility of breaking generational cycles of harm. The artistic output will include a series of portraits, documenting the emotional landscape of family reunification, installation pieces exploring themes of safety and danger within domestic spaces, and a written narrative that contextualizes personal experience within broader discussions of family systems, trauma recovery, and social justice. This project is particularly timely given current conversations about believing survivors, supporting family members who speak truth about abuse, and creating space for complex narratives that resist simple resolution. The work will be exhibited with accompanying educational materials about recognizing emotional abuse and supporting survivors. I wrote for 3 more hours until my hands cramped and my coffee had gone cold multiple times. By 11:47 p.m., I'd submitted an application that felt like a declaration of war, not against my family, but against the silence and complicity that had allowed harm to flourish in our house. As I was getting ready for bed, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother, Victor, wanting me to reach out and see if he'd like to talk to him before he comes home. He has some things he'd like to say to you. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. I'll be in touch soon about my plans. We should probably have a family conversation when I'm ready. Your plans? I'm thinking about coming home for a while for Maya and to work on an art project. I'll call you this weekend to discuss details. There was a long pause before her response. That would be wonderful, sweetheart. I've missed you so much. I believe that she had missed me. I also believe that she had no idea what she was inviting back into her life by welcoming Victor home. But this time, I wouldn't be the same frightened teenager who'd absorbed his criticisms and manipulations. This time, I'd be a witness, an advocate, and an artist with the tools to document what happened and the voice to name it accurately. Victor might be coming home, but I was coming home too, and I was bringing everything I'd learned about survival, healing, and the power of speaking truth in the face of family systems that preferred comfortable lies. The Arts Council called Tuesday morning while I was packing my car for the drive back home. I'd gotten the grant, 6 months of funding to document family trauma and recovery through art. It felt like the universe was confirming that I was making the right choice, even though my hands were still shaking as I folded clothes into my duffel bag. Sera? The voice on the phone was unfamiliar. This is Detective Rebecca Martinez with the Eugene Police Department. I'm calling because your name came up in connection with a case we're investigating involving Victor Kane. My blood went cold. What kind of case? I can't discuss details over the phone, but I was wondering if you'd be available to meet this afternoon. I understand you have a history with Mr. Kane, and we're trying to gather information about his pattern of behavior over the years. Pattern of behavior. The phrase echoed in my head as I agreed to meet Detective Martinez at a coffee shop in Eugene, 30 minutes out of my way to home, but worth the detour if it meant understanding what I was walking into. Detective Martinez was younger than I'd expected, probably early 30s, with kind eyes and the sort of calm demeanor that made you want to trust her immediately. She was waiting at a corner table when I arrived, a case file closed in front of her. "Thank you for meeting me," she said as I sat down. "I know this must be confusing, getting a call like this out of nowhere. What's this about?" She opened the file and pulled out a photograph, a woman about my age with dark hair and the kind of hollow look in her eyes that I recognized in my own mirror from years past. This is Jennifer Walsh. She was in a relationship with Victor Kane for 8 months, ending about 6 weeks ago. She filed a report claiming emotional abuse, financial manipulation, and threatening behavior. My stomach dropped. 6 weeks ago? But he's been telling my mother he's changed, that he's been in therapy, ... He has been in therapy, Detective Martinez said. Court-ordered therapy, following a restraining order Jennifer filed against him. The therapy was part of a plea agreement to avoid criminal charges. The world tilted. Victor hadn't voluntarily entered therapy to become a better person. He'd been forced into it to avoid legal consequences for abusing another woman. And now he was using that court-ordered therapy as evidence of his transformation to manipulate his way back into our family. There's more, Detective Martinez continued. In the course of our investigation, we've identified 3 other women who were in relationships with Victor over the past 6 years. All report similar patterns: initial charm and attention, followed by increasing control, emotional manipulation, and eventual isolation from friends and family. She pulled out more photographs, more stories. Sera, a waitress from Portland who dated Victor for a year. Lisa, a nurse who'd lived with him for 6 months. Rebecca, a teacher who'd barely escaped before the psychological abuse escalated to physical violence. All of them had stories that sounded sickeningly familiar. Ms. Donnelly, I need to ask you about your experiences with Victor when you were living at home. I told her everything. About the constant criticism disguised as concern, the way he'd undermined my confidence and made me question my own perceptions. The isolation from friends, the rules that seemed designed to keep me small and manageable. The night I'd finally left, when his rage over a B+ on my report card had escalated to him cornering me in my room, screaming about ungrateful, worthless children who didn't deserve the home he provided. Detective Martinez took notes, asking clarifying questions that helped me see patterns I'd never fully recognized. How Victor had systematically isolated each member of our family from outside support. How he'd used financial control to keep my mother dependent. How he'd alternated between charm and cruelty in ways that kept everyone off balance. The reason I'm telling you all this, she said when I finished, is that Jennifer Walsh is concerned about Victor returning to a home with children. She wanted us to reach out to you and your family to make sure you understand what you're dealing with. My mother thinks he's changed. She thinks the therapy means he's done the work to be different. Court-ordered therapy isn't the same as voluntary therapy. Most of these programs focus on anger management and compliance with legal requirements, not on the deep psychological work needed to address patterns of manipulation and control. I stared at the photographs of Victor's other victims, seeing my younger self reflected in each face. What can you tell me about his current status? Is he considered dangerous? He's not currently under legal restriction. The restraining order expired when his therapy program ended, but Sera, she leaned forward slightly. Men like Victor don't usually change their fundamental approach to relationships. They get better at hiding it, better at manipulating the system, better at finding new victims. And now he's coming back to my family, where he already knows exactly how to manipulate my mother and where there's a 13-year-old girl who doesn't remember what he's capable of. Exactly. I drove the last hour to my childhood home in a state of numb shock. Everything I thought I understood about Victor's return had been reframed. This wasn't a story of redemption and second chances. This was a predator returning to familiar hunting grounds, armed with new tools of manipulation and a legal system that had essentially given him a clean slate. My mother was waiting on the front porch when I pulled into the driveway, her face lighting up with genuine happiness at seeing me. She looked older than I remembered, more fragile, and I felt a surge of protective fury at the thought of Victor preparing to exploit that vulnerability again. Sweetheart. She wrapped me in a hug that smelled like the lavender soap she'd always used. I'm so glad you're here. I've missed you so much. Maya appeared in the doorway, taller than I'd expected and beautiful in the way that 13-year-old girls are before the world teaches them to doubt themselves. She launched herself at me with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been waiting years for this moment. I can't believe you're really here, she said, her voice muffled against my shoulder. I can't believe how tall you've gotten, I replied, holding her tight and trying not to think about how much she looked like I had at her age, Before Victor had taught me to make myself smaller. As we carried my bags into the house, I felt the familiar weight of the place settling around me. The same beige walls, the same family photos carefully arranged to suggest harmony, the same feeling of holding your breath and waiting for the other shoe to drop. But I was different now. I had language for what had happened here, tools for recognizing manipulation, and the knowledge that Victor's supposed transformation was built on lies. Victor will be here Saturday, my mother said as we sat down for dinner. He's so excited to see you, to make amends for the past. I looked at Maya, who was watching my face carefully, and made a decision. I wouldn't burden her with the details of what Detective Martinez had told me, but I wouldn't lie about the situation either. Mom, I need to tell you something about Victor's therapy, I said carefully. I found out today that it wasn't voluntary. It was court-ordered, following a restraining order filed by a woman he was in a relationship with. My mother's fork clattered against her plate. That's not. He told me he sought help on his own. He lied. And there have been other women. Other victims. This isn't a story about someone who recognized his problems and sought help. This is a story about someone who got caught and did the minimum required to avoid legal consequences. Maya was staring at us, her eyes wide. What kind of restraining order? The kind you get when someone is emotionally abusive and threatening. I said gently. My mother's face had gone pale. But he seemed so sincere. His letters were so heartfelt, so full of remorse. Mom, manipulation is what he's good at. It's what he's always been good at. The fact that he can write convincing letters about change doesn't mean he's actually changed. We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of this new information settling over the kitchen like a storm cloud. Finally, Maya spoke up. So, what do we do? It was the question I've been asking myself since leaving Detective Martinez. What do you do when you discover that the person your family is welcoming home is not just your personal abuser, but a serial predator who has perfected his techniques on multiple victims? We protect ourselves, I said. We stay alert, we trust our instincts, and we don't let anyone convince us that our safety matters less than someone else's redemption story. My mother was crying quietly, and I felt a familiar surge of anger at Victor for putting us in this position again. But underneath the anger was something new, a fierce determination to make sure this time ended differently. This time I had the tools, the knowledge, and the voice to fight back. This time I was ready for war. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzling, the kind of Pacific Northwest weather that matched the mood in our house perfectly. I'd spent the past 2 days preparing for Victor's arrival, like a general preparing for battle, documenting everything Detective Martinez had told me, researching legal options for protecting Maya, and setting up the recording equipment I'd borrowed from the Arts Council. My mother hadn't slept since our conversation about Victor's true circumstances. She'd spent Friday calling her sister, her best friend, and even her pastor, trying to make sense of how she'd been so thoroughly deceived. The woman who had been giddy with anticipation earlier in the week now moved through the house like someone anticipating a funeral. Maya had oscillated between asking pointed questions about emotional abuse and retreating to her room to draw anxious sketches in a notebook that looked suspiciously similar to mine at her age. I'd found her Friday night curled up in the window seat of her bedroom, staring out at the rain. I keep trying to remember more about what it was like when Victor lived here before, she'd said quietly. But it's like my brain won't let me. That's normal, I told her. Sometimes our minds protect us from remembering things that were too overwhelming to process at the time. Were you protecting me? Is that why I don't remember much about Victor? Because you made sure I wasn't around when bad things happened? The question had hit me like a physical blow, because she was right. I'd spent years orchestrating my life around keeping Maya away from Victor's worst moods, creating elaborate distractions when I sensed his temper building, absorbing his anger. So it wouldn't spill over onto her. I'd been 13 when she was born, old enough to understand that she was innocent and deserved protection, young enough to believe that sacrifice was my responsibility. Yeah, I'd admitted. I tried to keep you safe. Who was keeping you safe? No one, I thought, but didn't say. Absolutely no one. Now, as I sat in the kitchen Saturday morning drinking coffee and reviewing my notes, I felt the familiar hypervigilance settling over me like an old, unwelcome coat. Every sound outside made me tense. Every car that passed. The house made me wonder if it was him. Cleo had texted earlier, thinking of you today. Remember, you're not the same person who left that house 6 years ago. You've got this. Dr. Stern had called Friday evening to check in and remind me of the coping strategies we'd practiced. Your job today isn't to fix Victor or save your family, she'd said. Your job is to bear witness, document what happens, and protect yourself and Maya as much as possible. At 10:47 a.m., a black pickup truck pulled into our driveway. I watched from the living room window as Victor, Kane, stepped out of his vehicle and surveyed the house like a king returning to his castle. He looked older, grayer around the temples, but his posture still radiated the kind of confidence that came from believing the world owed you deference. He was carrying flowers and what looked like a wrapped gift, props for the performance of redemption he was about to deliver. Maya appeared beside me at the window. That's him. That's him. He looks normal. That's the point, I said softly. Abusive people don't wear signs advertising what they are. They look like everyone else. My mother had positioned herself by the front door, her hands twisting together nervously. When Victor knocked, she opened it immediately, and I watched as he deployed the same charm that had won her over 15 years ago. Leona, he said, his voice warm and gentle. You look beautiful. She melted visibly, and I felt my stomach clench. With familiar frustration. This was how it had always worked. Victor's ability to make my mother feel special, chosen, worthy of love, was the foundation of his power over her. He handed her the flowers, kissed her cheek with theatrical tenderness, and stepped into the house like he'd never left. His eyes found me immediately, and I felt myself stiffen under his gaze. Sera, he said, his voice carefully modulated to convey both humility and warmth. You've grown into such a beautiful woman. I've thought about you so often over the years. It was the immediate boundary violation, the comment designed to make me uncomfortable while sounding complimentary to anyone listening. I'd forgotten how quickly he could make me feel like my skin was crawling. Victor, I said neutrally, not moving from my position by the window. He turned to Maya, and I watched his expression shift into something that looked like genuine emotion but felt calculated. And Maya, my goodness, you're practically grown up. The last time I saw you, you were barely walking. Maya looked between Victor and me, picking up on the tension in the room, even if she couldn't identify its source. Hi, she said quietly. I brought something for you, Victor said, holding out the wrapped package. I remember how much you loved. Or even as a little girl, I thought you might like some real drawing supplies. The manipulation was breathtaking in its sophistication. Of course, he'd researched what Maya was interested in now. Of course, he'd chosen a gift that positioned him as supportive of her dreams while also echoing my role in her life. He was establishing himself as someone who paid attention, who cared, who wanted to nurture her talents. Maya looked at me before accepting the gift, and I gave her a small nod. She unwrapped it carefully, revealing a set of professional grade colored pencils that probably cost more than I'd spent on art supplies in the past month. These are really nice, she said. Thank you. You're so welcome, sweetheart. I'm hoping we'll have lots of time to get to know each other again. My mother was beaming, clearly interpreting this exchange as evidence of Victor's transformation. Here he was, being thoughtful and generous, showing interest in Maya's hobbies, demonstrating that he'd grown into someone who could be nurturing rather than critical. But I could see the calculation behind every gesture, the way he positioned himself physically to command the room, the way he made sure to touch my mother's arm or shoulder regularly, reestablishing physical dominance disguised as affection, the way his eyes kept tracking back to me, assessing my reactions, trying to determine whether I was going to be an obstacle to his reintegration. I was hoping we could all sit down and talk, he said, settling into the couch like he owned it. I have a lot I want to say, a lot of amends I need to make. The recording device in my pocket was already running. Whatever Victor was about to perform, I wanted it documented. I've spent the past 2 years in therapy, he began, really examining my past behavior and taking responsibility for the pain I caused this family. I want you all to know that I understand now how my actions affected you, particularly you, Sera. I was dealing with my own trauma and unresolved anger, and I took it out on people who didn't deserve it. It was a masterful opening, acknowledging wrongdoing without specificity, claiming therapeutic insight, positioning himself as someone who'd been hurt rather than someone who'd chosen to hurt others. The kind of apology that sounded meaningful but committed him to nothing. What specifically are you taking responsibility for? I asked. Victor's smile didn't waver, but I caught a flash of irritation in his eyes. He hadn't expected me to ask for details. I was controlling, he said carefully. I had unrealistic expectations about how a household should function, and I didn't handle conflict well. I said things that were hurtful, and I created an environment where people felt like they had to walk on eggshells. More sophisticated deflection, admitting to unrealistic expectations, and not handling conflict well, instead of acknowledging systematic emotional abuse. Describing the atmosphere he created as making people feel like they had to walk on eggshells without taking responsibility for deliberately creating that atmosphere. Do you remember the night I left? I asked. I remember that we had an argument about your grades, he said. I remember raising my voice, which I shouldn't have done. I was frustrated because I wanted you to live up to your potential, but I went about it the wrong way. My mother was nodding along, clearly believing this sanitized version of events. But Maya was watching my face, and I could tell she was picking up on my skepticism. That's not what happened, I said calmly. You cornered me in my room and screamed at me for 20 minutes about being ungrateful and worthless. You told me that any family would be ashamed to have a daughter like me. You said that if I couldn't appreciate what you'd given me, maybe I should try living on the streets and see how I like that. Victor's mask slipped for just a moment, a flash of the rage I remembered so well. But he recovered quickly. I'm sorry you remember it that way, he said. Trauma can sometimes make our memories less reliable. What I remember is being concerned about your future and expressing that concern poorly. There it was, the gaslighting, suggesting that my memory of abuse was trauma-distorted rather than accurate, reframing his systematic emotional assault as concern expressed poorly. But I wasn't 19 anymore. I wasn't isolated, financially dependent, or unsure of my own perceptions. I was a woman who'd spent 3 years in therapy learning to trust. My own experience and 6 years building a life that proved my worth. My memory is perfectly reliable, I said. And Detective Martinez would agree with me. The color drained from Victor's face. I'm sorry, what? Detective Martinez from the Eugene Police Department. We had a very interesting conversation about your court-ordered therapy and the restraining order Jennifer Walsh filed against you. My mother gasped. Maya's eyes went wide. Victor's carefully constructed performance crumbled in real time. That situation was a misunderstanding, he said quickly. Jennifer was unstable, she misinterpreted. Was Sera Martinez unstable too? What about Lisa Chan, Rebecca Williams? I pulled out my phone and showed him the notes I'd taken from my conversation with Detective Martinez. Funny how all these different women had the same misunderstanding about your behavior. Victor stood up abruptly, his facade of humility evaporating. I don't have to listen to this. I came here in good faith to make amends, and you're attacking me with lies and gossip. I'm stating facts, I said calmly. Facts that are documented in police reports and court records. Sera, please, my mother said desperately. Can't we just try to move forward? I looked at her, this woman who'd raised me, who'd loved me in the limited way she was capable of, who was so desperate for the fairy tale of family redemption that she was willing to ignore every red flag waving in front of her face. Mom, I said gently, I love you. But I will not pretend that Victor has changed when all the evidence suggests he's exactly the same person he's always been, just with better vocabulary. Victor was pacing now, his agitation building in the way I remembered from childhood. This was the moment when his mask would fully slip, when the rage he'd been containing would spill over into the kind of verbal assault that would leave everyone in the room. Feeling smaller and more broken, I was ready for it. This time, I was ready for all of it. Victor's pacing grew more aggressive, his footsteps heavy against the hardwood floor of the living room. I could see the calculation in his eyes as he tried to figure out how to regain control of the narrative. My mother was pressed back against the couch cushions, and Maya had moved closer to me, her artist's intuition reading the danger in the room, even if she couldn't name it. "You know what, Sera?" Victor said, his voice taking on the edge I remembered so well. "This is exactly why I left in the first place. Your attitude, your constant need to be right, your inability to let go of the past and move forward like a mature adult. There it was, the pivot that made everything my fault. The suggestion that his absence had been caused by my behavior rather than his choice to abuse his family. I felt the familiar pull to defend myself, to explain, to prove my worth, but this time I recognized the manipulation for what it was. "Tell me more about that," I said calmly. "What?" The response clearly wasn't what he'd expected. "Tell me more about how my attitude drove you away. Be specific." Victor's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to his victims asking for details instead. Scrambling to appease him. "You were always challenging me, always questioning my authority in my own house. You turned your mother against me with your constant complaints and dramatic reactions." "What kind of dramatic reactions?" "Crying at the dinner table when I tried to give you constructive criticism about your grades. Hiding in your room instead of participating in family activities. Acting like I was some kind of monster instead of a stepfather who was trying to help you become a better person." My mother was staring at him with growing horror as she heard her daughter's teenage distress, refrained as manipulation. Maya was taking notes in the margins of her sketchbook, her young mind working to understand the dynamics playing out in front of her. "So when I cried because you told me I was stupid and worthless, that was me being manipulative?" I asked. "I never said you were stupid and worthless," Victor snapped. "I said you were acting stupid and worthless," which was true. "There's a difference. Is there?" "Explain the difference to Maya." Victor looked at Maya for the first time since his mask had started slipping, and I watched him remember that he had an audience beyond the family members he was used to controlling. He tried to modulate his voice back to reasonable, but the rage was too close to the surface now. "The difference is that I was trying to motivate you to do better," he said. "Sometimes young people need to hear hard truths about their behavior so they can improve. And the night I left, when you cornered me in my room and screamed at me for 20 minutes about being an ungrateful bitch who would never amount to anything, was that motivation too?" "I never called you a bitch," Victor said, but his protest sounded weak even to him. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the voice memo app, where I recorded myself the night before recounting everything I could remember about that final confrontation. My therapist had suggested the exercise as a way of grounding myself in my own truth before facing Victor again. "Actually," I said, hitting play, "let me refresh your memory." My own voice filled the room. "March 15th, 2019. Victor cornered me in my bedroom after seeing my report card, which had 5 A's and 1 B+. He told me that the B+ proved I was lazy and that lazy people were worthless. He said I was an ungrateful bitch who didn't deserve the roof over my head. He said that my real father would be ashamed of what I'd become, and that he was starting to understand why my father had killed himself rather than stick around to raise me. My mother gasped and started crying. Maya had gone pale. Victor was standing frozen in the middle of the room, his face cycling through rage, panic, and calculation. "That's not. You can't prove I said those things," he stammered. "You're right," I said. I can't prove what you said 6 years ago, but I can prove what kind of person you are now. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the recording device that had been running since Victor arrived. The small digital recorder had captured everything. His manipulative apology, his gaslighting about my memories, his attempt to blame me for his abusive behavior. This conversation has been recorded, I said. Everything you said today, including your admission that you called a 19-year-old girl stupid and worthless as motivation, is documented. Victor lunged for the recorder, but I was ready for him. I tossed it to Maya, who caught it instinctively and stepped behind the couch. "Give me that device," Victor snarled, his voice now completely stripped of the gentle facade he'd maintained for the first hour of his visit. "No," Maya said quietly but firmly. The single word hung in the air like a challenge. Victor turned to face this 13-year-old girl who had just defied him, and I saw the exact moment when his rage found its new target. "You little brat," he said, advancing toward her. I said, "Give me that device." "And I said no," Maya repeated, her voice stronger now. I stepped between them, my body positioned protectively in front of my sister. "You need to leave, Victor. This is my house too," he said. "Leona invited me back, and some little girls with attitude problems aren't going to run me off again." "This was never your house," I said. "And we're not little girls anymore." Victor's face was red now, the veins in his neck standing out in the way I remembered from the worst nights of my childhood. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I was angry. Not the helpless, confused anger of a teenager, but the focused, purposeful anger of a woman who finally understood her own power. "You want to know what's different about this situation, Victor?" I said. "The last time you tried to intimidate me, I was 19 years old with nowhere to go and no one to back me up. This time, I'm 25 years old with a college education, my own money, a therapist who specializes in family trauma, and the phone number of a detective who's very interested in your pattern of behavior. You're threatening me? I am informing you, just like I'm informing you that if you take one more step toward my sister, I will call 911 and report that you're threatening a minor child." "Leona," Victor said, turning to my mother with desperation. "Are you going to let her talk to me this way? After everything I've done for this family?" My mother was crying hard now, her hands shaking as she looked between Victor and me. For a moment, I thought she might choose him again, might ask me to be reasonable, to give him another chance, to prioritize his feelings over Maya's safety. Instead, she stood up and walked to where Maya and I were standing. "What have you done for this family, Victor?" she asked quietly. "Because I'm starting to remember what you actually did to this family." It was like watching someone wake up from a long, confused dream. My mother was finally seeing Victor clearly, without the filter of desperation and loneliness that had made her vulnerable to his manipulation. "You made my daughter leave home at 19, she continued, her voice growing stronger. "You made my house feel like a battlefield. You made me choose between the man I was sleeping with and the daughter I was supposed to protect. And I chose wrong." "Leona, you don't understand," Victor started. "I understand perfectly," she said. "I understand that I was so afraid of being alone that I convinced myself your abuse was love. I understand that I failed Sera when she needed me most. And I understand that I will not make that mistake again." "You're going to regret this," Victor said, his voice low and dangerous. "All of you. You have no idea what you're throwing away." "We're not throwing anything away," I said. "We're protecting it." Victor looked around the room one more time, at my mother standing protectively beside her daughters, at Maya clutching the recording device that contained evidence of his true nature, at me blocking his path to the people he'd come here to reclaim. Whatever calculation he was making, he seemed to realize that this battle was lost. "This isn't over," he said. "Yes, it is," I replied. "It's been over for 6 years. You just didn't know it yet." Victor grabbed his jacket and headed for the door, pausing only to deliver one final threat. "You girls have no idea how cruel the world can be to women who think they don't need protection. You'll learn? The door slammed behind him with enough force to rattle the windows. We stood in the sudden silence, listening to his truck start and pull out of the driveway. With an angry squeal of tires, Maya was the first to speak. Is he coming back? Not if I have anything to say about it, I replied, pulling my phone out to call Detective Martinez. As I waited for her to answer, I looked around our living room, at my mother crying with what looked like relief, at Maya still holding the recorder like a precious artifact, at the family photos on the mantle that had always lied about who we really were, for the first time in 6 years. Our house felt like it might actually become a home. 3 months later, I was sitting in the same living room, but everything had changed. The walls that had once felt like they were closing in now seemed spacious and bright. Maya was sprawled on the floor working on a charcoal drawing, her technique already showing the influence of the art classes she'd started taking. My mother was curled up in her reading chair with a book about trauma recovery that Dr. Stern had recommended. And I was putting the finishing touches on the centerpiece of my grant project, a mixed media installation called Breaking Silence. The recording of Victor's visit had been more powerful than I'd anticipated. Detective Martinez had used it as part of a larger case documenting his pattern of behavior across multiple relationships. While there weren't grounds for criminal charges related to his emotional abuse of our family, the documentation had been enough to support a restraining order that kept him away from our house and Mia's school. More importantly, the recording had forced our family to finally have the conversations we'd been avoiding for years. My mother had started her own therapy, working through the guilt of having chosen Victor, over my safety and the complicated grief of mourning a relationship that had never been what she'd thought it was. Maya had started asking the hard questions about family dynamics, power, and the difference between love and control. Sera, Maya said, looking up from her drawing, can you explain something to me? What's that? In therapy today, Dr. Peterson talked about how people can love someone and still make bad choices that hurt them. How does that work? It was the kind of question that would have tied me in knots at her age, but 3 months of family therapy had given us all a vocabulary for these complex emotional realities. I think, I said carefully, that sometimes people mistake need for love. Mom needed to feel wanted and protected, and Victor was good at making her feel those things, at least in the beginning. But real love doesn't require you to sacrifice your children's safety or pretend that abuse isn't happening. So Mom did love Victor, but it wasn't healthy love? Something like that, yeah. And Mom loved me too, but she didn't know how to love both of us at the same time when Victor was demanding she choose. My mother looked up from her book. I'm learning that love without boundaries isn't really love at all, she said. It's just need disguised as affection. It was the kind of insight that had been emerging regularly in our family therapy sessions. Dr. Peterson had helped us understand that healing from family trauma wasn't about forgetting what had happened or pretending it hadn't been that bad. It was about learning to tell the truth about our experiences and building new relationships based on that truth. How's the Yale situation? My mother asked. I deferred my acceptance for a year, using the time to complete my grant project, help my family navigate the aftermath of Victor's return. Yale had been understanding about the circumstances, especially when I'd explained that my year off was being spent documenting family trauma recovery through art. They're excited about the work I'm doing, I said. Turns out that facing your family's dysfunction and turning it into art is exactly the kind of project that impresses graduate admissions committees. Maya grinned. Only you would turn family drama into college credits. Only I would have family drama worth college credits, I replied, and we all laughed. It wasn't that everything was perfect now. My mother still struggled with trusting her own judgment about relationships. Maya still had nightmares sometimes about Victor coming back. I still had days when the hypervigilance kicked in, and I found myself checking locks and watching for signs of danger that no longer existed, but we were learning to be honest about those struggles instead of pretending they didn't exist. We were learning that healing wasn't a destination, but a practice. Something you chose again and again rather than something you achieved once and kept forever. My phone buzzed with a text from Cleo. How's the installation coming? I looked around. The living room, which had been transformed into a working studio for the final pieces of my project. The walls were covered with photographs documenting our family's journey over the past 3 months. Images of difficult conversations, tears, laughter, and slow rebuilding. The centerpiece was a large mixed media work combining photography, painting, and sculptural elements to tell the story of breaking generational cycles of abuse. Almost finished, I texted back. Opening is next Friday. The exhibition would be displayed at the Community Arts Center where Cleo worked, with proceeds going to a local organization that supported survivors of domestic violence. It felt important that the project serve a purpose beyond just my own healing, that it contribute to the broader conversation about family, trauma, and recovery. Theo had been right when he suggested that sometimes the most important art comes from walking directly into the thing that scares us most. Facing Victor again had been terrifying, but it had also been transformative. I discovered that I was no longer the frightened teenager who had left this house 6 years ago. I was a woman with tools, resources, and a voice that could cut through manipulation and gaslighting to name abuse for what it was. I want to show you something, Maya said, holding up her drawing. It was a portrait of our family, but not the idealized version that had populated our photo albums for years. This was an honest portrait, showing my mother's worry lines, my defensive posture, Maya's questioning eyes. But there was something beautiful about the honesty. Something peaceful about finally being seen as we really were instead of as we thought we should be. It's perfect, I said. I'm calling it After, Maya said, because it's what we look like after we stopped pretending everything was fine. After, the word captured something important about where we were as a family. We existed in the after-time now, after the lies, after the denial, after the choice to prioritize comfort over truth. It wasn't easy living in the after-time. Truth-telling was messier than pretending, and healing was harder than ignoring, but it was also more real. The laughter in our house now came from genuine joy rather than nervous energy. The quiet moments were peaceful rather than tense. The conflicts we had were about normal family things, chores, schedules, disagreements about movies, rather than walking on eggshells around someone's unpredictable rage. As evening settled around us, I found myself thinking about the choice I'd made 3 months ago to come home instead of running away to Yale. At the time, it had felt like choosing family over my future. Now I understood that it had been choosing truth over illusion, courage over safety, love over fear. Sera, my mother said softly. I know I've said this before, but I need to say it again. I'm sorry I didn't protect you when you were Maya's age. I'm sorry I chose my fear of being alone over your safety. And I'm grateful every day that you came back to help us learn a different way. I'm not the same person who needed protection back then, Mom, I said. And you're not the same person who failed to provide it. We're all learning. Maya looked up from her drawing again. Do you think Victor will ever actually change? It was a question I'd wrestled with throughout the whole experience. Do people like Victor actually have the capacity for the kind of deep, structural change that would make them safe to be around? Or were they fundamentally limited by something in their psychology that made them perpetual threats to the people who loved them? I don't know, I said honestly. But I know that it's not our responsibility to find out. Our responsibility is to protect ourselves and each other, and to build the kind of family where people feel safe telling the truth about their experiences. Even when the truth is ugly, Maya asked. Especially when the truth is ugly, I replied. Beautiful families aren't families where nothing bad ever happens. They're families where people love each other enough to face the bad things together and figure out how to heal from them. As I prepared for bed that night, I stood in front of the mirror in my childhood bathroom, the same mirror where I practiced fake smiles and learned to hide bruises that weren't physical but felt just as real. The woman looking back at me was different from the girl who'd lived in this house 6 years ago. Stronger, yes, but also softer in some ways. More willing to be vulnerable, more trusting of her own perceptions, more confident in her ability to handle whatever came next. I thought about Victor, probably somewhere plotting his next attempt to insinuate himself into some vulnerable family's life. I thought about all the women like Jennifer Walsh who were still figuring out how to name what had happened to them. I thought about all of the children like Maya, who were learning the difference between love and control. My art project would be exhibited in 2 weeks, and then I'd be preparing to leave for Yale in the fall. But this time, I wouldn't be running away. I'd be carrying the lessons of this year with me, the knowledge that healing is possible, that families can change, that speaking truth in the face of comfortable lies is one of the most courageous things a person can do. As I turned off the light, I felt something I hadn't experienced in this house since I was a small child. I felt safe. Not because the danger had never existed, but because we'd faced it together and discovered that we were stronger than we'd known. Tomorrow, I would continue working on my installation about breaking silence. Tonight, I would sleep peacefully in a house where the truth was finally welcome. The heavy oak doors of Yale's School of Art creaked open with a sense of arrival, not just physically but emotionally. Sera stood at the threshold, a duffel bag on one shoulder and a portfolio case slung over the other. This was the same prestigious campus that had once represented a painful choice: freedom or family, future or fear. Now it represented a continuation, a reckoning that had made space for growth. Her apartment was a modest graduate housing unit, second floor with a skylight that bathed her easel in morning light. She unpacked slowly. Her charcoal pencils went into a recycled mason jar. The photo of Maya's sketch of her on the shelf above the desk, and Cleo's handmade paintbrush holder sat near the sink. Sera's life had expanded, yes, but her roots remained visible, nourished by memory and healing. Classes were rigorous. Critiques could be brutal, but Sera no longer flinched under scrutiny. At 26, she had already faced something more intimidating than a professor's judgment. She had faced the man who tried to shrink her into silence, and won. Her thesis was ambitious. The Witness House wasn't just a mixed media installation. It was an indictment and a testimony. She layered reconstructed blueprints of her childhood home over photographs of empty rooms where echoes lived. Audio snippets, whispers, footsteps, gasps played subtly as viewers walked through the gallery. Most powerful of all was a central sculpture, a closet door slightly ajar, with charcoal drawings of childlike hands reaching out from the inside. It wasn't about re-traumatizing, it was about reclaiming. Yale was no longer an escape, it was a platform. One she was ready to stand on, tall. Cleo's messages came like postcards from a previous life, colorful, chaotic, unapologetically her. The new mural's a rainbow dragon swallowing a corporate logo. Kids love it. Bored? Less so. Another one read, dated a poet. Broke up after they wrote a haiku about my shower routine. I'm recovering. Attached to one email was something unexpected, a letter from Jennifer Walsh. She had found Sera's gallery profile online and had seen the digital rendering of reconstruction. The note was typed but signed in cursive. Your work says everything I've tried to say in courtrooms. And group therapy. Thank you for not letting the silence win. You made it possible for me to believe we could be more than what they left behind. If you're ever in Oregon again, I'd love to collaborate. Jennifer's words landed like a gift and a challenge. Sera realized her art had already moved beyond autobiography. It was becoming advocacy. Sera began writing back, first to Jennifer, then to others. Survivors who saw pieces of themselves in her art sent DMs and letters. You drew the inside of my head, one woman wrote. My daughter and I cried together in your exhibit, said another. Each message cemented the truth. Art could be both mirror and megaphone. A bright orange package showed up at the Yale mailroom, addressed in careful block letters. S. Donnelly, handle with wonder. Inside, Miai's sketchbook. The first page was dedicated to my sister, the truth teller. It was full of stories and pictures, comic panels with expressive faces. Young girls facing looming shadows labeled doubt and gaslight. But there were heroes too. A girl with ink-stained fingers shielding her younger self with a paintbrush. Sera turned the pages slowly, tears rising. Maya wasn't just copying her sister's path. She was forging her own through storytelling, satire, even humor. Maya's new blog was gaining traction among teens dealing with complex family dynamics. In a post titled, "Our Family Tree Has Thorns," she wrote, "We don't need perfect families. We need honest ones. I don't want anyone to ever again think that silence equals safety." Sera shared the post with her classmates during a seminar on narrative art. They were stunned. One of them asked, how did she get so brave so young? Sera smiled. She didn't wait until someone gave her permission. Returning home for winter break, Sera noticed subtle changes in her mother. Leona had cut her hair short, started wearing glasses with bold red frames, and left post-it notes around the house with quotes like, "Grace is not permission," and "Redemption demands repair." She joined a support group for women healing from toxic relationships and was working part-time at the local library again. Therapy had become her weekly ritual. Her voice was more grounded now, less brittle, more present. "I started journaling," she said over coffee. "Not about Victor. About me. About why I ignored signs. About what I believed about love and worth." They didn't talk about the letter Victor had mailed last month. They didn't need to. Leona had given it to Sera, unopened, and said simply, "You decide what happens next." They burned it together in the fireplace, wrapped in strips of old photos that had once been displayed in silver frames. It wasn't erasure. It was choice. Ceremony. Leona didn't beg forgiveness anymore. She earned trust the slow way through showing up. Through small, brave acts like learning to say, "I don't know," without shame. The heavy oak doors of Yale's School of Art creaked open with a sense of arrival, not just physical, but spiritual. Sera stood at the threshold, a portfolio. Case in one hand, a duffel on her shoulder, her past packed not just into bags, but into her very bones. The same doors she'd once considered walking through as a form of escape now welcomed her back as a continuation, a reckoning that had made space for growth. Her apartment was a modest graduate housing unit, second floor with a slanted ceiling and a skylight that bathed her easel in morning light. She unpacked slowly and with care her charcoal pencils into a mason jar painted with Cleo's signature swirls. Maya's sketch of her hearts and all pinned above the desk, and Cleo's hand-sewn paintbrush holder near the sink. Her life had grown, yes, but her roots were here with her, visible and alive. Classes were intense. Professors didn't pull punches. Critiques could be brutal. But Sera no longer flinched under scrutiny. At 26, she had already faced something more intimidating than a professor's judgment. She had faced the man who tried to erase her, and she walked away not just intact, but radiant. Her thesis, The Witness House, was more than art. It was testimony. The gallery installation was haunting and immersive. Blueprints of her childhood home reconstructed from memory and trauma overlays. Empty rooms echoed with faint, looped audio whispers, gasps, footsteps, silence, broken by breath. At the center stood a life-size sculpture, a closet door, slightly ajar. From within, charcoal-drawn hands reached out not for escape, but for recognition. She didn't name Victor in the artist's statement. She didn't need to. Those who had lived with ghosts recognized the house. Survivors who visited left notes in the guest book. "I felt less alone here. Thank you for drawing my silence. This house is my house too." The faculty noted her work with reverence. Critics used words like transcendent, gut-wrenching, and necessary. But Sera didn't measure success in reviews. She measured it in the young woman who stood in front of her installation for 20 minutes, silent tears streaming down her face, and then whispered, "I didn't know anyone else had that closet." Late at night, Sera painted on her balcony. The sound of distant sirens and jazz from a neighbor's radio lulling her into flow. She sent Maya photos of her new sketches, this time not of clenched fists or locked doors, but of hands holding. Paintbrushes, tea mugs, letters, not healing complete. Healing in progress. Maya's replies always made her smile. "That one's my favorite. You should do a series on sisters, or I started my own sketchbook, don't laugh." One evening, Professor Langley, known for his bluntness, stopped by her studio unannounced. "I want to talk about your voice," he said, gesturing to her latest piece, a fractured portrait collaged with slivers of mirrors and childhood handwriting. "It's not afraid anymore." Sera nodded. "It's not angry anymore either. Still fierce, just dot focused." "You've done something very few artists can," he said. "You've made pain not only beautiful, but useful." She didn't answer right away. She thought of Maya, of her mother's tentative smile in therapy, of Jennifer Walsh's email. Sitting unread in her inbox, waiting for courage. "It wasn't just my pain," she said. "That's why it's useful." Cleo's emails had always read like diary entries from a rebel poet on a color-soaked tour of life. Since Sera's move to New Haven, Cleo had adopted a ritual weekly dispatches from Portland. They were peppered with updates, gallery gossip, and emotional weather reports. One week it was, "I painted a mural of a flaming dragon swallowing a Tesla logo." 2 toddlers applauded. Capitalism wept. Another week, "I'm dating a poet." We're on day 3, and they've already written a haiku about my shampoo. I'm cautiously optimistic. For Sera, these messages were lifelines. They reminded her that the world she had built in Portland, the one where she was more than her trauma, where she laughed hard and cried safely, still existed. Still waited. But this week's email had been different. The subject line was simply, "For you." "Hey love, this came in the gallery's mail yesterday. I wasn't going to open it because, boundaries." But the handwriting caught my eye. Tight, nervous, like someone holding their breath. "It's from someone named Jennifer Walsh. You might want to sit down." Sera unfolded the scanned letter slowly. It was neatly typed on simple white paper, no letterhead, no logo, just words. "Dear Sera, you don't know me, but I know pieces of you. I recognized them in myself when I saw your installation online. A friend forwarded a write-up of The Witness House. I clicked the link expecting another academic exercise in trauma aesthetics. Instead, I found something that made me cry in. The middle of my kitchen, the closet door, the blueprints. The way you rendered silence as sound. That was me. I was with Victor Kane for 8 months. The last 6 were a descent. I didn't even realize I was afraid of him until I tried to leave. And then I knew it in my bones. I tried to report him. I have the paperwork, the restraining order, the therapy notes. But he was smart and charming, and the law isn't always on our side. They told me he completed his program, that he was compliant. Your art said everything I couldn't get a courtroom to understand. Underscore. Thank you for refusing to forget. Thank you for refusing to be quiet. Underscore. If you're ever back in Oregon, I'd like to talk. Maybe collaborate. In survival. Jennifer _Sera read the letter 3 times. Once as an artist, once as a survivor, and once as a sister. Each reading deepened her resolve. That afternoon, she wrote back. It was the first of many. Her letter to Jennifer was short, but every sentence was deliberate. Dear Jennifer, Thank you for your courage. And for your eyes clear enough to see art as survival. Yes, I remember. Yes. Let's talk. Yes. Let's build. Something new from what they tried to break. And witness. Sera, what followed over the next few weeks surprised even Sera. Other letters arrived, some digital, others handwritten, some as social media comments or DMs. They came from strangers who had seen the exhibit or read about it or seen snippets shared online. Each message carried a story, a wound, a whisper. Some were just fragments. I didn't have a closet. I had a bathroom floor. My mom never left him, but I did. Your installation was the first time I realized what happened to me had a name. My daughter cried watching your gallery film. I cried watching her recognize herself. Sera printed out each message, taping them to a wall in her studio. She called it the living wall. At first, it was just for her to remind herself why she'd said yes to the pain of telling the truth publicly. But soon it began shaping her next project. These weren't just stories. They were echoes, proof that silence, once broken, travels far. One night, while organizing the newest batch of letters, Sera caught herself rereading a particular message, a comment from a woman in her 60s named Beth. I saw your work and remembered a voice I buried in 1983. That line haunted her. She thought about Beth, about Jennifer, about Maya, about her mother, about the thousands of voices buried across generations. What did it mean to unearth them? To create space for them to breathe? That night, Sera opened a new sketchbook. On the first page, she drew a circle of open mouths, some speaking, some silent, some stitched, some screaming. In the center, she wrote one word in charcoal: collective. She knew then what her next body of work would be. It wouldn't be just her story anymore. It would be theirs. The envelope arrived on a Friday afternoon, tucked between an alumni newsletter and a flyer about composting. It was addressed in neat, looping script. Sera Donnelly. Return address: Jefferson Middle School, Portland, OR, postmark 2. Days ago. Inside was a folded letter on wide ruled paper and a familiar sketch-colored pencil lines, deliberate and expressive. The drawing showed a girl standing beneath a stormy sky, holding an umbrella with the word truth etched in bold across its surface. Next to the girl was a much smaller figure, a child looking up at her with awe. A sticky note was attached. To the top. For your collection. Thought it might belong on the living wall. Sera held it against her chest for a moment before unfolding the letter. Dear Sera, we had to do a project in language arts called The Person Who Changed My Life. Some kids wrote about celebrities or grandparents. I wrote about you. Ms. Jordan said we could write a poem or a story or a letter. I wrote this letter and a drawing. She said I could send it if I wanted to. So here it is. When you came back, I didn't really understand why. I thought maybe you were just visiting, or maybe you missed Mom. But then I saw the way you looked at Victor, and the way you stood in front of me like you were a wall and a sword and a shield all at once. I saw that you weren't scared of him anymore. I saw what brave looked like. I didn't remember much before, but now I do. Not everything, just feelings. Like the way I used to flinch when I heard the door slam, or how I would feel safer when you were home. You didn't make it big. Deal out of it. You just made me feel normal, safe, like bedtime stories were armor. You didn't have to come back. But you did, and you showed me it's okay to say, that wasn't love. You showed me that silence isn't safety. I'm still scared sometimes. But now I talk about it in therapy, in class. Sometimes with Mom, when we're ready, you taught me how to be someone who tells the truth. I hope I grow up to be like you. Actually, I hope I grow up to be me, but with your kind of strength. Love. Maya Sera wiped at her eyes. The page blurred. Not from sadness, but something gentler. Not quite joy, but peace. A knowing that her return had never been about confronting Victor. It had been about lighting a path back to herself, and in doing so, offering Maya a path of her own. Later that night, she called Maya. "Hey," Maya answered on the second ring, her voice brighter than usual. "I got your letter," Sera said. "And your art, it's beautiful, it's brave. You think so?" Maya asked, quieter now. "I know so." "You've got your own voice, Maya, and it's strong." There was a pause. Then, "Do you remember the day we made that blanket fort in the living room and stayed up watching cartoons until Mom got mad?" Sera smiled. "How could I forget? We used every chair in the house." "I remember that more than anything Victor ever said," Maya said. "I think that's important." "It is," Sera replied. "It means love left a deeper mark than beer." Silence settled between them, the kind that didn't need filling. Then Maya asked, "Do you ever wish things had been different? Like, if he hadn't been so?" "Him?" Sera thought for a long moment. "Sometimes. But then I remember, if things had been different, I might not have become who I am. And I wouldn't have been ready to help you when you needed it." "I think about that a lot," Maya said. "Like how stories don't always have to have heroes, but we can still choose what kind of character we want to be." Sera blinked back more tears. "You've always been a main character, Maya. You just needed a chance to write your own chapters." "I think I want to write them down. Not just drawings. Actual writing. Like essays. Or maybe even a book someday." Sera grinned. "Then write them. I'll be your first reader, your biggest fan." "I was hoping you'd say that," Maya whispered. "Because I think my story matters too." "It does," Sera said. "It absolutely does." After they hung up, Sera returned to her studio and pinned Maya's drawing above her desk. It joined the others' testimonies from women of all ages, sketches from survivors, notes from strangers who'd found themselves in her work. But this one was different. This one was legacy. Sera sat down and picked up her journal. She wrote one sentence at the top of a blank page. "This is how we break the cycle. We tell the truth, and then we teach others to do the same." She underlined it twice. Then she began to write. The opening night of Reconstruction Revisited arrived with a hush of snowfall and the weight of everything Sera had carried for a decade. The gallery was alive with movement friends, faculty, survivors, strangers, all drawn to the invitation. An exploration of generational harm, reclamation, and the power of naming the unspeakable. The installation was housed in a repurposed chapel just off campus. High ceilings echoed with soft, layered sound recordings of real voices reading excerpts from survivor letters, including Maya's. Projectors cast images of empty rooms onto canvas panels stitched with thread, charcoal, and fragments of paper. Hanging overhead, a canopy of translucent fabric held silhouettes of hands open, reaching. Refusing to let go. In the center of the space stood the piece that had given the show its name, Reconstruction Revisited, a full-scale reimagining of the hallway in Sera's childhood home. Visitors walked through it slowly, passing photographs etched with invisible ink, only visible under special lights. Beneath the images were inscriptions of truths that had once been silenced. It wasn't just yelling. Safety doesn't mean silence. I was there too. I remember. This is not your shame. By 6:30, the room was full. Theo arrived in a black turtleneck, proud as a stage parent. Cleo came bursting through the door in a faux fur coat, dragging a reluctant poet behind her, This is Max. They brought snacks. Approve accordingly. A group of fellow students lingered near the refreshments, marveling at the emotional precision of the work. Even a local art critic known for eviscerating installations in 5 words or fewer stood solemnly, scribbling. Notes with visible care. Sera stayed near the entrance at first, watching, listening. People weren't just observing, they were feeling. A woman in her 60s wept quietly in front of the projected closet door. A teenage girl took out a sketch pad and began drawing her own hands. A man in a business suit read every word on the wall and, when finished, placed his hand gently on the railing before exiting. Then she saw them. Her mother stood near the rear exit, holding Maya's hand. Both of them wore black, understated outfits, not mourning, not celebration, but presence. Maya had grown taller. Her hair was pulled back, and she looked older than 13 Ys in the way that only truth can shape someone. Sera approached slowly, unsure of what she'd find. Her mother smiled first. "It's astonishing," Leona whispered, her voice full of reverence. "I didn't know truth could be so beautiful." Sera's throat caught. "Neither did I, not until I let it breathe." They stood in silence, 3 generations of women unburdened by the need to pretend. "Is that my voice in the hallway piece?" Maya asked suddenly. "From the letter I sent?" Sera nodded. "Your line opens the exhibit. You say, 'I didn't remember everything, but I remembered the feeling.' That felt like the beginning of all of this." "I'm glad," Maya sighed. "It feels like part of my voice lives here now, and it's not trapped anymore." Her mother touched Sera's arm. "I'm sorry I didn't come to the Portland exhibit. I wasn't ready. I was still afraid of who I was in your art." "I was afraid too," Sera said. "But it wasn't about making you the villain. It was about naming what happened, so we could finally tell new stories." Leona nodded, tears shimmering but not falling. "Then I think we're ready for a new story now." The gallery lights dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd. Theo stepped forward to the podium to offer his brief remarks. "We live in an era of revision," he said. "We rewrite what history tried to delete. We reclaim what shame tried to hide. And tonight, we stand inside the reconstruction of one woman's journey and the collective courage that made it possible." He gestured for Sera to come forward. Applause rose, warm and full. She stepped up to the mic, her palms damp but steady. "I thought about what I'd say tonight," she began. "I thought about telling you how this work came from pain. But you already know that. You see it in the lines, the voices, the silences. So instead, I want to talk about what came after." She paused. After the silence, there was sound. After fear, there was witness. After trauma, there was survival, but more than that, there was transformation. This exhibit is not about what happened to me. It's about what I chose to do with it. A murmur of agreement moved through the room. I once thought that telling the truth would destroy what was left of my family. But I was wrong. It didn't destroy us. It freed us. It gave us the tools to build something real. Something rooted in honesty, not denial. She looked out across the crowd, catching Maya's eyes, then her mother's, then Theo's. "I don't stand here tonight as a victim, or a heroine, or even just an artist. I stand here as a witness. And if I've learned anything, it's that. Witness is contagious. When one person stands up, it gives the next person permission, and then the next. And soon we have a chorus. A rising, a reckoning." She stepped back, silence, then thunderous applause. Later, after the crowd dispersed, and the last glass of sparkling cider was poured, Maya walked up to Sera and wrapped her arms around her. "You were my favorite part of the whole exhibit," she said. "Same," Cleo added, appearing behind her. "Though I also really like the soundscape made of whispers." "That was very ghosts, but make it feminist." Sera laughed, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. She looked around the gallery, her sanctuary, her story, her offering dot in the corner. A blank canvas stood waiting. She would paint again tomorrow, but tonight. She stood in the quiet aftermath of everything that had once broken her. Whole dot witness dot home dot up next. We have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.